Well, let's get into the topics on today's show as we welcome you to this edition of Kelly & Company. Fat is essential for good health, but how should we best consume it? That's the question. Nutritionist Julia Karantjas will be here shortly, and of course, she'll let us know. And how is orientation and mobility changing for blind and low vision people? O&M Specialist Mark Rankin breaks down how tools, training, and AI are dramatically shifting the game. Well, we shift too, folks, into today's show next.
This is Kelly & Company.
Thank you for being with us always. Any time that you have for us, really appreciate. Kelly MacDonald here, and I welcome in Danielle Jongkind, our veterinarian, who's going to be kicking the show off with me today. Danielle, I have to say, this crazy week. I mean, we've got on the federal front, we've got some discussions in French and English as the debates are rolled out Monday and Tuesday of this week as they pick a new leader. And on the provincial level in Ontario, we are actually getting towards our Thursday election. So I have to ask you, I think back, because, when you get to my age, you always want to think back to when I was in high school. It might actually make me feel more younger and like it wasn't that long ago until I think too much about it. I remember them trying to get us into knowledge of politics. Not heavily. I mean, I was a nosy kid because of the media interest, so I was always playing around with stuff like Maclean's magazine and things like that. So I was always aware. I was a huge fan of Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, back in the 70s. Next to my dad, he was the coolest guy, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and I just felt like I wanted to get to know him anytime he spoke on TV. He's talking to me, not you, not you. He's talking to me. Was the way I felt. When did you kind of first become aware of politics at all?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't really until my adulthood. I mean, we had to take all the stuff in school about, democracy and government and history and
right,
how all that stuff works. But, as far as getting out and, actually checking out party platforms and voting for myself and all that kind of stuff, really wasn't until I was an adult that became really a thing. And now I would miss it. I mean, I'm glued to CBC News. I'm glued to CNN, just to see what's going on out there, right?
Yeah.
And to, get on the websites for the different parties and check out their platforms and all that stuff. And I think everybody has their own priorities, about what they think is most important. So I'm, just really thankful we have the opportunity to live in a democracy where we can say, hey, this is important to me and I'm going to vote accordingly. That's important.
I know most of us in the disability sphere, we obviously want to hear things addressed that kind of point towards us. I'm sure, like you said, everybody has their reason, their thing. And I think back to as a kid when I was into media, I got very influenced by Jimmy Carter. So of course with his recent death, and I know right now our American politics is not where most of us want to go right now. We're getting enough of that, and it's really negatively affecting people, and we do have to think about, and I've always been one on this program, I don't want to get into all that. I don't want to talk all that stuff, and if we have to, obviously you get into something, but I do fondly remember enjoying learning about politics as a kid, but I wasn't a kid that wanted to go and, hey, I want to be a page for a day or something like that. I mean, I've been by Parliament Hill for television work, but I didn't necessarily always want to go sit in the house and see what it was like, whether it be on the provincial or federal level. So really interesting, because school, they did try to get us to learn a little bit about it, at least to know our parties, at least to understand stuff, and I felt it pretty vital. But I was also raised by a father who said, don't talk religion and politics with people. Just keep that to your own. Be aware, be knowledgeable, have your own faith and your own beliefs, but you don't need to talk about it with other people. I advise, he would say, that you don't. And I've always kind of taken that advice, knowing about the passion we feel and should in the topics, and let people think and be who they are. So Folks, remember to check out our podcast from your podcast platform of choice. While you're in there, give us a rating and review. Also remember, YouTube. You can subscribe. Please follow us on our YouTube page for lots of great content that we place up there from the show. Up there on YouTube, subscribe at your convenience to Kelly and Company. We'd really appreciate your time, as we always do, whether you're checking us out on AMI Audio, via the podcast, or on YouTube. Well, as mentioned, the Ontario provincial election is this week, and with all the issues that Ontarians are considering when they decide to cast their votes, animals don't really seem to be much of a factor. Funny enough, still, that doesn't mean that animals aren't ever involved in politics, does it? I mean, there are lots of examples out there where pets and other animals have been thrust into the political arena, into the spotlight in some way, for one reason or another, right? Dr. Danielle Jongkind is going to take a light-hearted look and show us some examples of animals in politics. Dr. Danielle, how have animals been involved in politics, and how serious do we take it?
Well, you might be surprised at what you can dig up about this, I know when I was trying to think of, what could we do that would be sort of fun to talk about, on election week, right? And I was really surprised when I started kind of looking into it, and I discovered all kinds of weird, wild, and wonderful stuff about this, bizarre role that animals have sometimes played a part in politics. And everything from how cats were once allowed to run free in Canada's parliament buildings, to the role that politicians' pets have played during their time in office, to animals running for elected office. Yes, that has been a thing, believe it or not. So yeah, there's lots to talk about.
Okay, so animals running for politics. I somehow feel like we may have talked about something related to that about 5, 6, 7 years ago on the show. Cats running around, that is vaguely familiar to me too. And I know I've heard of references to the different dogs, cats, birds, and stuff like that that political figures throughout the world have had. Where do you want to start?
Well, we could talk a little bit about cats in Canada's parliament. I think we did do a section on this in the show a number of years ago. But, basically the cats were brought into Canada's parliament back in somewhere around 1924. And that was because there was a rodent overpopulation problem in the parliament buildings.
Yeah, they were tilting things. They had too many seats.
Too many seats.
Yeah, the rodents had too many seats in the parliament. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I wonder what party they were leaning towards.
Yeah, I didn't ask that. But according to what I could find out about this, the cats reduced the rodent population somewhat successfully, but of course soon began increasing their own. If there's anything that breeds faster than rats, it's cats, right? So, they were moved outside at that point, and they were actually used for rodent control until the 1950s. But of course, by then, volunteers were feeding this outdoor colony of cats that lived on Parliament Hill. And in the 1980s, they had this series of outdoor shelters were built for the cats on Parliament Hill. Then they became kind of like an icon, and they attracted all kinds of visitors. And, everybody sort of generally regarded this cat colony with goodwill, and the politicians did too. By the 2000s, they were being vaccinated for free at a local veterinary hospital, and a pet food company was donating food to help feed them. So nobody could say that the Canadian government was paying for all of this, right? And they were also being spayed and neutered, which, for the first time caused a population decline. And then in 2013, the last Parliament Hill cat, a cat named Cole, who was a black cat apparently, was adopted by a volunteer, and the Parliament Hill cats were officially disbanded at that point. And believe it or not, but I was able to find out that Cole actually put his name out on Parliament Hill with an offer to run for Prime Minister in 2015. I don't think he was ever on the ballot, but and then with a tongue-in-cheek joke, the same article that was talking about that said that apparently he was all for a coalition government.
Oh, wow. And probably
Bad
they
pun.
utilized that Nashville cat song. Nashville. Instead, parliamentary cats. Use that song for the walk up tune, right? It's interesting too, Danielle, and I always find it amazing when you rope in our rats and mice and stuff like that. And it's so true how many buildings in the 1800s through into the early 90s, they just accepted these animals are here. Oh yeah, there's another rat running over there. Just keep your cheese under guard and whatever. Before they started to say, this is just not healthy. As we learned more, you got to do something to get them out. So send in a bunch of security cats to take care of it. Oh my, wow. Okay.
Yep, it was a thing. Yep. But we could also talk about pets of politicians, because really that's kind of another way that, animals have become involved in politics because they are attached to their people who just happen to be politicians. And we know that politicians actually get a lot of media coverage, and sometimes that spills over into their personal lives because, we all just really want to know who is this person who's in this office, right? Like, who are they personally?
It makes them more human to us too, doesn't it? I think we like that.
Well, it does. It does. And it's kind of like celebrity worship, do they have pets? Do they have kids? What do they do in their off hours? What hobbies do they have? La, la, la. So anyway, as a result, you can sometimes find news stories about the pets of politicians. For example, I remember seeing a few stories in the news that U.S. President Joe Biden's dogs bit a number of people during
I remember that. Yep.
I do too. And certainly we heard lots and lots about Queen Elizabeth and her love for her dogs and corgis in particular. That was very well known. But perhaps the most striking story I found out about pets of politicians was one of Canada's former Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, had the distinction of being the longest serving Prime Minister in Canadian history to date. He was apparently quite devoted to his dogs, all of whom were named Pat. Okay. When one pet would pass away, the next one would come along and it would be Pat. And, after his death, his personal diaries were allowed to become public knowledge. And apparently he was rumored to have consulted Pat on matters of political importance, which I thought was pretty fun.
Can you imagine the question and answer period or one moment, please? Can we call, hold on a second, the Speaker of the House, just a one moment, please. And all right, Pat. And going over to have that discussion with the dog. But again, I bet you this throughout the world is far from uncommon.
Sure. I'm sure people tell their pets all kinds of stuff, the question, I guess, is what answers you get back in return.
Keep those secrets. Do not tell anyone, especially the opposition. That's great. And I think it's so interesting, the naming convention. I wonder if there was a 1, 2, 12, 15 sign.
I have no idea.
Passed on. Oh, man. Okay, so we know that. William Lyon Mackenzie.
Yep. And then, of course, there's animals running for elected office. So most of these, of course, were, done kind of like a joke, So it has happened here, and not just here, but in other parts of the world as well. And of course, most of the examples I could find of this were representing a form of political protest by people who are disenfranchised with the current political climate. So I'll take you through a few examples that I found because they are pretty good. The first one comes from the United States in 1968, where the quote-unquote Youth International Party, who were also known as the Yippies, presented their party's candidate.
In the 60s? The Yippies?
Yeah,
wow, I'm surprised. Yippies. Can't even imagine hanging out with them flower children.
So.
Yeah.
But they presented their party's candidate for president in a press conference, and it was a pig that they called Pegasus. So apparently they brought Pegasus on a leash to Chicago. They got up to make a speech and were promptly arrested before they could say much of anything. And then Pegasus was seized and was given to animal control, and presumably never having had his chance to run for president.
Foiled again.
Foiled again. Yeah, no, it was a thing. And then another example I could find comes from the Mexican city of Jalapa in 2013. So, a local resident by the name of Sergio Chamorro, who was upset by the failures of local politicians, nominated his cat Morris as a candidate for mayor. And Morris's campaign slogan was apparently tired of voting for rats, vote for a cat.
Oh, well, then you start.
I,
All you pictured is Morris the cat, right, from the commercials. I wonder if there was kind
yes.
of any segue to that.
I don't know, but Morris's campaign apparently inspired a number of other communities in Mexico to nominate pets and farm animals for mayor as well. And in the end, the news reported that Morris received 12,000 votes in that election, earning himself a fourth place finish out of 11 candidates for mayor.
Yeah, I think we would be terrified to play those games too often because, it really would hurt people's ego when people just kept throwing their hands in the air saying, no, there's no one here worth voting for except the cat. Bring on Morris.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have animals running for office for a more serious reason. So you might be thinking that nobody would put an animal on an election ballot for a political campaign up for any serious consideration, but I was actually able to find some examples of this too. So Toronto held a municipal election in 2023 and fielded a huge number of political candidates, all hoping to be mayor. One man by the name of Toby Heaps put himself on the ballot as a partner with his dog, Molly. And believe it or not, Molly was actually ineligible to run as her own candidate because she wasn't 18 years of age.
Oh.
In an article, yeah.
But associate on the ballot, no? Maybe that did the trick.
Yeah. Well, in an article published by Global News, Mr. Heaps was described as saying that he wanted to make Toronto a more dog-friendly city and that he thought having Molly in council would help the council to be a lot more human and become more effective at finding solutions. So I thought that was kind of a heartwarming story. As we all know, Olivia Chow was elected mayor of Toronto, but, it was kind of a nice idea. And if you have 100 and so candidates, it's kind of a good way to distinguish yourself out of the pack, so to speak. And I guess that was kind of a bad pun, but whatever.
Yeah, okay. But like you say, really gets to the heart on that one because unfortunately there are some people would say, well, it's true. And what are you going to do? Strike down a certain move? If there's certain, hey, we move that we accept this idea, we accept this because of pet safety on the streets now. Oh, cars are... And that puppy with those puppy eyes looking at you. Well, yeah, all right, let's move past that one. I think it would probably help more than we think.
Maybe, who knows?
I think that's great.
The last example I found, yeah, it really was. The last example I found was actually kind of really heartwarming for me. And this was the case of Dawson City in the Yukon. And they decided to elect a dog council for their city as a fundraiser for their local humane society. So the funds were raised coming from a fee charge for nominating a candidate to this dog council. And apparently it wasn't just dogs that got in on the political action, though. Cats and even at least one alpaca were also put on the election ballot to potentially join this, dog council in Dawson. So I thought somebody really had a great brainwave for that one. Let's raise some funds for the Humane Society by, holding elections for pets.
Everybody loves alpacas. They're their own celebrity nowadays. Yeah. They really do. They have their own cachet or something. And Pegasus I go back to because all I think about is the old Hercules cartoon, which would have been big in the 60s, and the winged steed horse Pegasus. So of course we're going to move over and get old Pegasus involved. Wingless, however, right? Thanks, Danielle. This was beautiful.
Okay, I'm glad you had fun.
Danielle Jongkind getting us ready for our elections. Don't be voting for Pegasus on the ticket this week in Ontario. No. Poor Doug Ford hasn't been around much, but we're not going to pick on him like that or anything like that and say, he's your substitute. Oh, Pegasus in the past. I do want to talk a little food news, ladies and gentlemen. Could cheese be the secret to better sleep? Now, this is some recent data that's been out there involving 400,000 plus participants, and it's revealed that eating cheese influenced more than 23 biomarkers related to sleep apnea. Now, this is by Corn Miller. Research says that a simple tweak to your diet might lower your risk of developing sleep apnea. Eating some cheese. The researchers discovered that people who ate cheese had a 28% lower risk of having sleep apnea than those who didn't. Not only that, the data said that eating cheese influenced 23 biomarkers related to those to sleep apnea. Now, if you don't really know about the biomarkers, of course, they are molecules found in the blood that can indicate what's happening in the body. Now, it's important to stress up front, of course, the study simply found a link between eating cheese and a lowered risk of sleep apnea. It didn't find that cheese will actually reduce the risk. Instead, people who eat cheese are less likely to have sleep apnea than non-cheese eaters. But doctors say that some elements of cheese might help lower the risk of sleep apnea in theory. Not all cheese, however, is created equal, and cheese can also lead to weight gain, which is one of the risk factors for sleep apnea. There are healthy cheeses which are higher in protein, lower in fat, and richer in nutrients and key vitamins that may have also contributed to the associated key factors with the positives in this study. But most people do eat more than cheese, making it hard to pin this all on the dairy product, of course. The most durable and effective lifestyle modification to reduce the possibility of sleep apnea is weight loss, but that can be caused, of course, by more than just weight. If you're snoring at night or having any other symptoms at night, it's best to check in with your doctor and maybe even get into a sleep study. And when I had my health incident in 2019, I remember they talked to me about the potential of sleep apnea. And of course, I figure, well, I'm a big guy, big chest, big man overall. Maybe that might be some kind of concern to what I was realizing might have been a bit of shallow breathing if I fell asleep watching the ball game or whatever, waking up with a jolt. So of course I started to think of those kinds of things, did the sleep test finally, and nothing. But so many people, I think, are realizing, and I've talked to so many people who will say, man, what a difference. They found that I needed some assistance. They get a machine, and it's a world of difference. And there are quite a few dangers, and that's kind of what sold me on it as they talked to me about it, that, hey, you know what? There are things that it can lead to. It's best to rule it out. I invite Julia Karantjas to join us now. Julia, have you heard of some of this stuff, especially anything else that has rumored or a theory that maybe it helps with sleep apnea or might help divert it? And welcome. Oh, let me see if Julia can hear me. We'll see if we sort. Julia, can you hear me? So I have always wondered what has gone on when it comes to the sleep apnea thing for myself when it was first mentioned, because you do think the bigger person thing. For myself, I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe that is likely to be something that I need to figure out. Is this happening? Is this going to be an issue for me? And wasn't really sure, and wasn't sure where I should go with it. But getting the test finally, and I know some people feel, yeah, but they're going to recommend you go do a test anyway. That's just the world we're in now. Maybe. But I like I say, I've known people who say to me they're so happy that they've had that opportunity. They're so happy that they said, hey, I better go do it and do the sleep test because of what may be a problem. And if they do or don't have it, they're far better armed to know if they do or don't. Julia, do we have you there?
We're working on her.
Okay, we almost got her. She's almost with us. So what I will do, ladies and gentlemen, is mention to you that we are looking for people who wish to be a part of our research panel, folks. We're looking for members of the disability community to join the AMI research panel. Our research panel guides us with every decision that we make here at AMI, including programming, media consumption, and accessibility. All things that we got to know what you're thinking, what you're doing, because it would help us know how to plan out the programming. We are an ever-changing network and so many different things going on. Participants are compensated for all long-form studies. For more information, and in case you do want to join the panel, go to ami.ca/panel. We'd love to have you join us and be on board. Okay, Julia, welcome to the show. Were you able to check that article out and give me some thoughts on, do you experience any of these kinds of questions, whether it be via sleep apnea problems, the potential to avoid that, or other of the things that may be health issues that we would probably consider a little more obscure, that people might come out of nowhere and say, hey, if I eat more of this, is this better for me to keep me from having sleep apnea problems?
I haven't come across any holistic protocols for dealing with sleep apnea. I mean, it's a pretty serious condition, a medical one. And so we definitely in the holistic world would never recommend you go against your doctor, especially when the risk factors when you have sleep apnea for other medical ailments are very high. I do think the cheese study is really interesting, although obviously this is one study. We haven't there was no information in the article pinpointing what it is about the cheese. I mean, cheese has fat in it. Fat is nice and stabilizing, which is great. It has a little bit of protein in it, which we know is great for like stabilizing energy levels. It is really hard to sleep if you're too hungry or if your blood sugar is really high. And so cheese gives you protein and fat, which is really great for stabilizing your energy levels. So I could see how something that would give you those two nutritional components would be beneficial for sleep. I'm not really quite sure about pinpointing those markers for sleep apnea, but I mean, it's really interesting anytime you read about food helping issues, medical issues, because food is so powerful. And it's always great to lead a lifestyle that keeps you free of ailments, and then to have this information come out that might be helpful. But I do think there's probably a lot more to dive into, because like the article said, I mean, there's so many different kinds of cheeses. Are you eating, a wheel of brie? That seems to be not a great idea. But we know, hard cheese is a bit different, and a couple pieces of hard cheese where you're getting protein and fat might be really helpful.
Well, and like you said, there's so many types of cheese. How could you it's a funny thing that this was one of the things they'd link, because it's kind of like saying, hey man, chocolate bars, certain ones, can help you with sleep apnea. Well, what do you mean and why? And how would you ever stumble even over that without, again, running further testing, like you said, and certain things that would say, okay, well, we know we want to find cheese that aren't necessarily going to put weight on a person. Do they have any bearing on it? Or is it the fat? Or is it what? I don't even know how you'd stumble over this.
I know. And I mean, exactly. And what cheese and how much were they eating? Because that is such a variable. I mean, and so interesting. But, I can't imagine people were eating pizza with all this cheese and bread, and that was helpful. I don't know. I'm just making that assumption.
Yeah, because I thought of it just on its own. Now that you mention it, that's true. Like I didn't really think of, hey, are they having pizza? Are they having bruschetta bread or something like that with cheese? Are you counting that? Because to me, that would just totally skew whatever results, because you really would have no idea. Is it the tomatoes? Is it the bread? Is it the cheese? Does it have to be cooked, or do you have to eat it, just like as is, or do you have to melt it? Fascinating stuff. Thank you. Well, I know we're going to get into some really interesting stuff here as we move along in our conversation today. Folks, you can email us if you have questions, things you want to tell us. kellyco@ami.ca, and call us at 1-866-509-4545. Always love to hear from you. So, Julia, let's get into fat being essential, since we've mentioned it, being so essential for good health. But how the heck should we best consume it? So we're here with you to talk a little bit about it. Our nutritionist, Julia Karantjas, on the program. And first thing I got to ask, because again, mentioning in the cheese item we were just talking about, not all cheese is created equal. Are all fats created equal?
They're not, but they're our friend. They're all helpful. All naturally occurring fats are helpful. So saturated fat that would come from, or if you ate red meat, you would get saturated fat, can be helpful. And then you've got two other categories in your unsaturated fats, which are mono and polyunsaturated fats. So they are different. Some are healthier than others, and this has to do with the components of the fat. For example, we know polyunsaturated fats give us an antioxidant called a phenol or a polyphenol, and so we know that this content is different. And then we've talked multiple times on the show about omega-3s, flaxseed, chia, flaxseed oil. So those are different as well. But we certainly do want to make friends with fat. It's so protective of our brain. It helps to keep our energy level nice and stable, and it helps us absorb certain nutrients. Vitamin D, which we know is good for the immune system. Vitamin K, good for bones. Vitamin E, an antioxidant. These are all fat-soluble vitamins. We need fat to absorb them. So fat's our friend. We need to make friends with it, and just understand that there are some differences, but as long as it's a whole food and it's a whole food source, it's not processed, it's going to be okay.
Julia, is that when people come for advice, one of the most surprising things to them of how you might need to eat more or consume more of this to help the absorption of that? Is that one of the most enlightening things that most of us who have no idea, who are looking for the nutrition support, where the light bulb moment happens?
Yeah, I do think so. I think 30 years ago, we really villainized fat. We also really villainize it. We do have so much great research coming out, not even overly recent, but, the last decade. But I do think people, and because it's just not common information, don't quite understand how these macronutrients, our carbs, our fats, and our proteins work together. And they do all have a very important role in the body. And it goes so deep, and everything works together, which is important.
Because we're always talking about that with the vitamins, with anything we mentioned that, hey, if you take this, vitamin does this, helps out with the absorption of that. Now, sucking this stuff into our system, I know the big question we ask you all the time is, hey, is it better to absorb the fat kind of eat them raw, don't cook with them? I'm assuming some things you're better to do that with for absorption, or just the effectiveness of them, and some things not. So let's start with the stuff that should be eaten raw.
Yeah, it's very finicky. Those omega-3s are really, really sensitive. So flax oil, eaten raw. And when we say eat it raw, I mean using it in its cold state. So either drizzling it on top of food, drizzling it on top of a dip or hummus or yogurt, or obviously salad or any kind of vegetable once it's been cooked, maybe drizzle it after the cooking process has happened. Olive oil, we can cook with olive oil. We know it actually has a pretty good smoke point, we call it. But you wouldn't, deep fry with it.
Right. Yes.
The saturated oils are much more stable at those higher temperatures. But avocado oil at higher temps and nothing bad is going to happen to it. But it's the unsaturated ones where the bonds aren't quite as strong, and they will, the molecular structure will change a little bit if they're exposed to too much heat, and that's really where the flax oil and the oils that come from nuts would be sensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
And where I get lost is the difference between saturated fats and unsaturated fats. I get lost.
Yes. Yeah. And this is a big category. I mean, and it's one of those things where as a nutritionist, you just, you make lists time and over again, and you just learn through repetition, because it is sort of hard to differentiate. One of a really easy way to gauge it is if butter at room temperature is a solid, right? It stays in its shape, and that is an indicator that it's a saturated fat. If the fat, let's olive oil at room temperature is liquid, and that's a really telltale sign that it's an unsaturated fat. And that is probably one of the easiest things to go by. But then you've got an avocado, which is unsaturated fat, which obviously it's a food. And the same thing with a nut. It's a food. It's not going to have that same property. Oils is where we'd find it. Like avocado oil at room temperature, liquid. It's an unsaturated fat. So it's hard to differentiate. Sometimes you might just have to Google. If it's an animal-based product, it's going to be a saturated fat. If it's plant-based, most likely it's going to be an unsaturated fat. That could be maybe an easy concept to wrap your head around. Obviously, there's exceptions, but that's a typical.
Again, fat is so funny because we're discouraged. We've talked about this recently about things. Oh, watch your fats, watch your salt, watch your this and that. So we get turned off of, I better just stay away from it because it gives me a headache to figure out which one I can deal with on what level. And I guess that's something to think about too. If you struggle with that, how much should we eat every day or consume?
Yeah, a great question. And this is where, when you go see a nutritional consultant, where the meal planning would be helpful because they would be able to give you your proper ratios. Yeah. So it would depend on how much you're going to be eating in a day. Men typically do eat more, 2,200 calories to 2,500 calories, depending on the lifestyle. Women typically eat less, anywhere in between, 16 to 2,000 calories, again, depending on lifestyle. Obviously, there's numerous factors why somebody would eat more or less. And so it would be a percentage of that daily caloric intake. If you had just a general health and wellness goal, 20% of that should be from fat. And 5% of that should be from saturated fat. So have a little butter, have a little steak. But you don't want to be, you don't want to keep them low because, again, we know we need it for brain power. We know we need it for nutrient absorption. And again, depending on if you have a fitness goal, it could be up to even 30%. So 20 to 30% of your daily caloric intake. And then the rest of the calories would be from carbohydrates and proteins. So things like your whole grains, fruits and vegetables, and then legumes, meats, eggs, if you eat them, those sorts of things.
Is the overindulging?
Yeah.
Is the overindulging in fats how we scare ourselves the most?
Yes, and it's also so easy to overindulge.
Oh yeah.
Fat is very calorically dense. If you have a gram of protein or a gram of a carbohydrate, it's only 4 calories. But if you have a gram of fat, it's 9 calories. And so that density, you have this tiny little portion of nuts or, a tablespoon of peanut butter. And anybody that's ever stuck a spoon in a peanut butter jar and eaten it, it's pretty easy to eat a tablespoon of peanut butter. It's very easy to overeat, and then now you're having too much of this one nutrient and potentially not enough of the other ones, or now you're just overeating in general.
Right.
So it's just easier to overeat your calories with a fat source because it is so much more calorically dense than the, its buddies, carb and protein. So there's
and available.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to snack on nuts than a fruit salad. Yeah,
and just slides in there whether we're cooking with oil or doing something or sprinkling something on something because, hey, I like this. I'd rather have this than some of those creamy salad dressings. I'll put some oil or something on it. And not even think that it's shooting us, I won't say in the foot, but shooting up, our intake. Wow. Fantastic, Julia. Anything else in closing on fats?
Yeah, just don't be scared of them. They are helpful. Just be mindful of where you're getting them from, but definitely you want to eat them.
Yeah. And as they say, the hipper people than me, now that we've got all this information, hey man, I'm fat with that. Thanks a lot, Julia.
Thanks.
Julia Karantjas joining us. That's our nutritionist visiting, and we're talking fats this week on the show. Visits with us once a week here on Kelly & Company. Do me a favor, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Lots of great stuff that Nazreen is putting out there. Always get you to interact a little bit or just things involving the show. Keep track of us over on Instagram and Twitter, and you can do it at Kelly & Co. AMI. Kelly & Co. AMI. And again, remember, check out our content on our YouTube page and our podcasts. So, question for you, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to pose this to our next guest. How is orientational mobility instruction changing for the blind and low vision community? Remote training, for example, AI advancements, digital tools that are out there. So let's get into these ins and outs with O&M Specialist Mark Rankin joining us on the program. Mark, good day to you. What's going on?
Lots.
Is that the magic word? What?
There's been a lot of changes in a lot of different areas. For the end user, obviously, there's a lot going on in terms of the way you interact with technology. Sometimes as a surrogate O&M, sometimes providing information about the environment that's not there naturally. What has been now on my radar is that the way orientation mobility specialists are working is starting to be impacted. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is we're Soundscape. Soundscape community is well known to a lot of people. There's an authoring tool that's been around for a while, but they're finally kind of relaunching it now that the consortium is sort of set up and the transition to Soundscape community has been completed. What it allows an O&M to do, though, is to create a route remotely using a map. And if you're using the native map in the authoring tool, along with, say, something like Google Street View, you can really put together a pretty detailed picture of what would be the best way to travel through a given environment. Now, there's some caveats. I mean, I wouldn't do this with somebody who I wasn't really well aware of their travel abilities. But for people who say, you're not teaching them new travel skills, you're just doing route familiarization, right? So someone's established. This would be a way I would really consider. I mean, it's something that happened during COVID, during the lockdown. We tried different ways of doing remote stuff. And a lot of it was not very effective. But this is sort of an idea that, you could do a lot. The other thing it allows us to do. I mean,
Mark, how do you find, because teaching people, not everybody, and again, we look at people who can learn in school from the chalkboard. Look, they'd rather read something. Somebody needs something told to them. But we find the same with mobility. If you say to somebody, can you take me down to your corner store? Yes, I can. But can you tell me how to get there without going out there? No, I'll show you. It's easier for me. It is amazing because learning this stuff, whether you want to help someone, if someone says to you, Mark, how do I get there? Some people can sit there, listen to you talk. Got it. Others, there's no way. They need you, Mark, show me. Let's go for a walk. When we look at a lot of the tools like we're talking about with Google, figuring all that out, that's a challenge for you as an instructor, knowing, okay, I got to apply time to learn these things for those that it's useful for, but they're the people who are out there. They're not just the technology. We're not even that, just the ability to learn that way. How are you managing that when it comes to this stuff?
For sure, it's a lot of work on our end. I mean, what you can do with the authoring tool is so when I create the route, when you're walking that route, you're going to get a beacon that's moving to each point that I've designated as a waypoint on the route. Yep. So it's going to guide you essentially, right? You can also attach like sound files or images if you have a low vision. So say a low vision user and I want them to look for a particular visual landmark, I can actually attach a picture of that landmark so that will pop up on the phone when they arrive at that waypoint. Or at the departure of their last waypoint. Yes. Yeah, or a sound. For instance, if there's a particular sound and listen for this fountain, I could actually have the sound of the fountain so that they're prepared for that. They could also use street preview at home and get all the experiences, and they'd also have to make the turns in order to move to the next point on the route. So it does sort of reinforce the experience. It's a virtual experience still, but it's more involved than just listening to someone narrate, well, this is what you're going to do. You're going to turn left.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same, Mark. Well, you'd almost say it's the same as when you go back with someone back in the old days, say, now, do you remember that as we walked, you heard the fountain? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then the automated crossing was there, right? It's along the same lines. It's a different way of, like you say, previewing instead of, now tell me what you'll find. We did these things with mobility instructors to go over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's not reinventing the way things are done. It's just a different platform of sharing information, but you're still sharing the same sort of information. As an O&M, you're still making the decisions about what you think is important, and you're making decisions about what you think is a safe route or an efficient route. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah. And more of us are comfortable with technology now, than as opposed to, especially since pandemic times, as you were mentioning, then we're scared of it.
For sure, yeah. No, the other thing that we're just starting to use now, because we're just getting the WeWalk Smart Cane, the version 2 in at Vision Loss Rehab, is their AIM platform. So AIM stands for Artificial Intelligence Mobility. And that captures a whole lot of data. So some of it is just basic subjective data, like it asks the client to report on their level of confidence in the route. So it just kind of monitors that as it changes over time. But most of it is objective measurements. So some of it's high level stuff, such as just like number of steps, the length of the walk, the time spent walking, speed of your walking. You get an overall map of the route the person's done. So, within the confines of GPS, which is not perfectly accurate, you can tell, for instance, if somebody's veered, like they veered to the wrong side of the street, that'll be obvious on the map because I can see an outline of where they've walked overlaid on the actual map of that block or whatever it is that they're walking. The other information it gives you is information about how they're using the cane. So the angle of contact between the cane and the ground. So is it being held far out in front or is it closer to you? How wide the arc is. And when you put all that together, that's a fair bit of information.
It is. And important for you as an instructor.
Yeah. And now, not only is it great because if you loan someone one of these canes, then you get eyes on their travel when you're not there, which we never are able to do as an O&M. And that's usually, there's always a difference, right? There's always a difference in performance when you have an orientation mobility specialist with you versus when they're not there, because there might be a little bit of difference in your
it's like the driving tendencies that people might have, but yet you got dad in the seat beside you telling you, hey, move over a bit, versus when I ain't got anybody here. And it's true, because you're more relaxed, and any of the things that bad habits, you're going to pick up and you're going to do them, and there's not someone to, hey.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing is, even if I'm working with someone, I'm not going to be as observant as this technology will be. So I won't know, I've done a walk with someone and I might, over time start to put something together. You know what? I have a feeling, I'm going to have to check it now next time we go out. I have a feeling that when when your arc is narrower, you walk straighter. Right. And when your arc is wider, you're slower, and that might be affecting it. But this would definitely give me access to that information. And the other thing is, their WeWalk's idea is that as they start to use this more and they get more data from O&Ms, then they start to use AI to interpret it sort of objectively. And you might find things that as an instructor, you're not able to monitor because there's so many variables going on, but it might notice patterns that humans wouldn't, or would take us longer to notice. So that's a real start. Then now you're starting to really see instruction may be impacted by AI. AI might actually, come up with some ideas that as an O&M we wouldn't traditionally think of, right? Because it's monitoring all these different things, and it's noticing correlations that as a human you just can't see everything at once.
But it is getting, with that help, your ability to be able to personalize each person. Some of us may drift more. You may have that tendency, you hear something, the traffic, a car go by, you may move away from the roadside. I know that was something I used to do. If a car was coming along right up beside me, subconsciously, you move over a way, as if you're making way for it to come up on the sidewalk, because of our own personal fears, which can lead us into problems.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways you could see it going. I mean, I remember years ago every year in Toronto we do some training for the ophthalmology interns, just starting, and it's just more awareness of what we do as an agency and dealing with rehabilitation aspect, because that's the part that I'm
Right.
with.
Yeah, for sure.
And I usually show them technology. And I remember when seeing AI first came out, I was sort of showing them how there's some orientation mobility applications of it. And this was probably maybe 5 years ago, whenever it came out. And they were all saying, oh, everything's changing, like radiology. If you go in and a radiologist looks at your x-ray, he or she may have seen like 10,000 x-rays in their life, but AI can compare your x-ray to every x-ray in the database, maybe a million,
instantly
in a few seconds.
Yep, instantly to get that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so at some point we're going to have technology, wearable technology or cane-based technology that's going to be able to really, really maybe diagnose issues, right? Imagine like something that could say, diagnose a gait issue and its impact on mobility. Like there's
even health-wise, Mark, we talk about how many of us walk a certain way because we've never been shown how to properly walk, and how later in life a lot of people have lower back issues or some kind of issue with walk because we don't walk right. As a blind person, no one stops us. You got to walk. No. Turn your feet in a little more, turn them out a little more, whatever it might be. This thing can help with that. And it draws the attention that, hey, you can red flag these things. You can have it look for that. And I think so many of these things are so useful because, as you say, instructors are great. Like I used to think when I was taking mobility, it was tremendous the stuff you guys could pick up on, but you can't see everything. You're walking behind. The key thing is, do you know where you're going? Are you going to make a crossing safely? But what little elements? No one's been able to keep me from doing my kind of moving over because I'm nervous of the traffic, angling, and somebody behind me, sir, to the left, things you don't necessarily want, All right, more likely to the right, folks, more likely to the right.
Yeah, the ability to just get all this information, like when we're out there working one-to-one with a client, so much of what we're doing is monitoring their safety, and so you're continually monitoring traffic, what's going to happen, what's going on there. So you do, your attention is definitely divided, right? Whereas, technology.
Well, and you're talking learning stuff that it can pick up whether you need it for your client, but it can pick that up, compare with a database for somebody maybe in Philadelphia that is doing cane training with somebody or guide dog training somewhere. And wow. What little things when it comes up as, hey, this is a tendency, could be an issue. Noticing this particular gait problem, one may wish to get a little extra instruction on. Like all these little facts things that can come from grabbing this information that helps other people. Mark, anything else you want to go when we come to this technology? I'm just fascinated how much time you guys must have to put into it because there's just not enough hours in the day.
No, it's very hard to be an expert on everything. I brought these two up because these are two things I've worked a little bit with, so I have, some knowledge base. But clients are continually coming to me like, is this going to be a good device, or is this going to be something that, like, I'll try to get a look at it. But all this stuff you have to try, and you have to live with it for a little while before you really realize what the potentials are, right? So it is.
Well, you've gone from 0 to 60, Mark, right? Like. When you think about the cane, when you think about supporting people with a guide dog, and now here's the ways we're supporting. Look over there. There's so many things potentially that can help. How do I catch up on them? I can't even imagine how courses for orientational mobility specialists have changed now just in the last few years.
No, they have to have technology sections, and the professors don't necessarily know everything. So I've offered to go in and just do some training on a device or an app that I really well familiar with, and they appreciate that because you can, the best you can do is sample, and then you hope that if you learn one thing, then that knowledge base will apply, and you start to get a set of criteria that you can kind of use. But you've got to start somewhere with learning something really well, and how do you choose that?
Absolutely. Mark, fantastic. Always looking forward to these chats, and there's so many things you can relate to, but what an exciting time.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. It is a really exciting time technology is changing
Wow.
everything, and our rotation will is certainly no different.
Yeah, and again, I think it's amazing, and I know it's a lot of what people, a specialist can put into it, and a lot of it is the cooperation of the client who, hey, I'd like to use those tools, or just the awareness of this data that we're able to collect quietly can make such a difference on maybe what I work with you on in 2 months, 10 years, or somebody else that we won't even ever know has been able to do something with this information. My friend, thank you. We'll talk to you next month.
All right, that was a pleasure.
You betcha. Mark Rankin, Orientation and Mobility Specialist out of Toronto, working with us. We get into these conversations once a month right here on Kelly and Company. Wow. So many cool things and advancements. I think, and I know a lot of us will say, oh, that's just too much. How the heck can they learn all that? How can you be out there in the field doing all that? I think you have to have that keen interest, but you also have to know that this, for me, is what I can do for my clients, and I can only do so much, and I think there's a lot of it is accepting that. I want to suggest to you to check out the show tomorrow, folks, because they say dog is a man's best friend. But what about the horse? And Kane will be joining us on the show from the Canadian Therapeutic Riding Association and going to share with us the 45 years of experience that the organization has and the benefits of equine assisted therapy. All that on our show tomorrow as we get together with you. And remember, Parasport Nation will be a part of the program tomorrow. I'm waving at you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for tuning in to Kelly and Company. Follow us on all social media. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more.